We will now move on to item 9, discussion regarding recruitment, retention, strategic initiative update. Dr. Linton.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, Board. Dr. Waldrop, thank you all so much for having me to talk with you about our strategic initiative related to recruitment and retention. As you know, as we work within our Future Ready framework, one of our tenets has to do with strategic collaborative leadership. And within that, we ask ourselves the question, to what extent do we hire, develop, and retain highly effective teachers, ensuring access to all students? And based on that, we came up with 2 objectives. And it's the same objectives that we have every single year when we're looking at human resources. How do we recruit the best and how do we retain the best? That's always the question. And specifically what we're looking at this year is how do we enhance our existing recruitment strategies, and then what are some new and different ways to recruit that maybe we have not tried before. And we do that by looking at analyzing data as well as just researching different avenues. Also, expanding our retention efforts. We always want to retain staff. Staff in classrooms, we want to retain our custodians, our bus drivers. We want to retain all of our staff, our principals, our administrators. And this year, one of the things that we are trying to do extremely strategically is hearing the voice of employees, hearing the voice of staff as to why they stay, and if they're thinking of leaving, what are some of those things that might make them think of leaving, and where those parts that we can control or something with which we can have some impact. Okay. I mentioned data. A couple of weeks ago, had an opportunity to meet with the board. We had a board workshop where we talked a lot about data. We talked a lot about the context for what is happening nationally, what's happening across the state, and what's happening within our district. And when you look at national, state, and district data, it indicates that teachers are leaving the profession at a higher rate, in some cases, than ever before. And what's making it more difficult, even in those areas where it's not higher than it's been, what's making it difficult is the supply is just not there in the way that it's been in the past. So you've got this perfect storm of people leaving and not as many who are coming into the profession. And when looking at the reasons, there are several, but the 2 that keep coming up is the whole idea of work-life balance. And again, we saw that nationally, we see it through state surveys, and we've seen it through our own district surveys and talking with teachers and staff. And also just expectations within the profession, because you've got the expectations that happen within the nation. You've got the expectations that come from the state. Then you've got what we figure is important as a district. Then you've got our community or even your school community. So there are all these different expectations that play into what teachers have to do as well. And then there are fewer students actually pursuing education. I think I mentioned to you, I spoke with one program where they said 35 to 40% of the students in their program opted not to become certified. So that's after going through a 4 or 5 year program. That is after taking the appropriate exams, going through student teaching, and just decided, I'm not going to teach. And so that's something that we've not necessarily seen before, and now we're seeing that. When you look at the national average for tenure in education, it's about 5.5 years. And so while we are always going to work towards retaining excellent staff, that is never, ever going to stop. We have to recognize the reality that many people are only staying in the field about 5 to 6 years. And then there's the high competition for labor between the public sector and the private sector. You know, I was talking with someone, I said, teachers and administrators have great skills that travel. They are great communicators. They are great collaborators. They know how to analyze data. They know how to communicate with people. And so they are absolutely fantastic candidates for not only education, but for the private sector as well. And I know it may be difficult to see the little chart that's over to the right, but there was a state survey that went out to teachers, and it asked for their perception of their value. And it was disturbing. I will say it was disturbing. When you look at how teachers feel that their colleagues value them, that stayed about steady, about 81, and it went to 82%. When you look at all those other areas, and you're not able to see them, but it talks about school administrators, parents, community, Texans overall, and then elected officials. So it talks about how teachers feel they are being valued or not being valued. That's something I think we can absolutely work on that. We can absolutely work on trying to help as much as possible our staff to feel valued, because we want to see those numbers go up. Okay. And I mentioned one of the things we wanted to do was to hear the voice of staff. And so we conducted what we called stay interviews. And to tell you how awesome our staff is, we asked principals to submit the names of up to 4 teachers on their campus who might be willing to talk with us about why they stay and what are some challenges to teaching right now. Teaching within the state, teaching within this nation, teaching within our district. We got 238 names. 212 of those responded and met with us during the summer. 212. That's how committed our folks are, and that's, I thought, was absolutely incredible. And they were so committed that they asked, can we continue? So now we've got a group of 212 teachers who get together monthly via Zoom and talk through things that are happening for teachers. And so what we found from hearing them, same thing we heard at the national level, same thing we heard at the state level, work-life balance. And that work-life balance included workload. And what was so powerful about being able to speak with the teachers, as opposed to even just a survey, is we could ask them what that meant, because we've been hearing workload and work-life balance. What does that mean for you? And many of them said it's just with the different things that are being asked of me, both professionally and then with my home life, it is hard to balance those things. So when we have to add reading academies, while that's a great idea in theory, when I've got to do all these extra hours, as well as what's required of me by the district, and then I want to be a parent and be a good parent and a present parent, that's a lot. And so that whole idea of work-life balance and workload was a part of that. We heard from a teacher, it's not so much that I have so much more to do in my professional life, but my personal life has changed. And so now it is hard for me to balance those things that have been easy for me in the past are just not quite as easy anymore. And then we also heard loudly and clearly from them clarity of communication and expectations. It's, okay, we hear that this is going on and we have to do this. Exactly how does it need to be done? When does it need to be done? Is this from the state? Is this from the district? And so we heard loudly and clearly and started responding to that. So now we've got an internal website for employees. We've also got a staff member who's dedicated to ensuring that those internal communications are put out. We're also trying to be extremely or even more purposeful when there is something that comes. How can we get this information out to staff? And I reference teachers, but please know when we're looking at retention, we need everybody. Everyone who can come in and do a great job for kids, we need every single one of them every single day. Every one of them. And so when we look at our response, we tried really hard to be, and I'm going to use this word again, strategic, just try not to do things haphazardly, looking at what are things that we can change now and impact now. What are those things where it's going to take a little bit longer? And with over 9,000 employees, some things are just going to take a little bit longer. They're just going to take a little bit longer. but looking at what are those things we can do now. So our immediate response already has been the Strategic Abandonment Initiative. You've heard us speak about that at previous board meetings. We're trying to do that not only at the district level, but even at campuses. What are some of those things that we just don't need to do anymore, or we can do in a different way? So looking at those things. Continuous employee input. How can we hear the voices of teachers, custodians, secretaries, staff members? How can we hear from them what their experience is like so that there is not a disconnection? How can we help people to feel connected? Flexible training opportunities. If there was one thing that came from COVID, it was we don't all have to get in one room and meet together every single time we need to discuss something. And so looking at what are those different ways to get that training. Streamlined communications, I mentioned that previously. Compensation and incentives, always looking at compensation and incentives. We review it annually, that if there are things that happen where the market appears to shift during the year, we look at it then as well. Wellness resources and initiatives, and looking and listening to staff. As a result of the pandemic and the whole idea of that work-life balance, we heard loudly and clearly we need help in how to do that. Because we hear all the time you need to have it, but how exactly do you do it? And so we've got staff who are dedicated to ensuring that we get information out about benefits that are available just because you're an employee with the district, not because you take benefits through the district or have your health benefits through the district, but there are some things that just because you're an employee, you have access to them. Then looking at other things, one of the things that came through our ESSER funds. ESSER funds are able to support that employee behavioral health. So what are some resources? What are different types of things that have to do with nutrition, financial coaching, things like those things, making those available to staff. And then just professional growth and that targeted support and resources, ensuring that if there's something that's needed, how can we help to make sure people have what they need to do what's a really tough job? Enjoyable, but tough. And what do teachers enjoy about working in FISD? And I'm pleased to say there are 4 circles as opposed to the 2 on the other page. But the culture, the growth and development opportunities, the support and resources. When you look at our campuses, and we've got instructional coaches, digital learning coaches, we've got behavior specialists who can come in and assist. So as a district, we are rich in the resources that are available to staff members. And then what I love, and we saw it on national trends, we saw it at the state level, people enjoy their colleagues and their coworkers. They enjoy that sense of community that's been built. So, as I've mentioned thus far, with retention, we are going to continue those things that we know are incentives and that are great for our staff. I know through ESSER, there were many districts last year that talked about using ESSER funds to provide a retention incentive. Well, you as a board started doing that way before ESSER ever came. We did it, starting 3 years ago. And so there are some things that you've put into place that have been helpful, and we want to ensure that as much as possible we're able to continue those. And we want to continue hearing from the voice of staff members. We have started with teachers. Our goal is to ensure that there's some way that we can hear from all staff members. Expanded District Advisory Council. There is a committee on leadership, and part of what they'll be discussing is also retention and recruitment. Enhanced opportunities for connection. Got a great idea from a teacher the other day who said, can we as new teachers, in addition to our new teacher activities, can we have something where we just have a time to connect? We were able to pass that along to the professional learning department. They already have plans for an activity like that sometime in the spring. And so really helping people to connect, because we see connection is so very, very important. Campus visits, frequent timely communication. I mentioned wellness benefits. You all know that we opened our employee clinic this year, the Employee Health Clinic, and we are getting great results and great feedback from that. And strategic abandonment, I've mentioned that as well. Right. And then with recruiting, we've got these things that we typically do, and I won't go through that entire list, but you know, of course, that we've got our university visits, we've got conferences that we attend, there are job fairs that we hold here within the district, as well as going to other job fairs. We host student teachers. We've got something that we call 360 degrees for 365. That means when we're recruiting every single day, and as we talk with people, it's not just I'm going to meet you at a job fair and then hope you come to our district. It's the follow-up with, would you like to come and visit? Our principals have been incredible about saying, you know, if someone's coming in, let them drop by. I'll show them around. I'll have someone to show them around, and that has been huge. It makes a big difference when someone can walk into our buildings and see what we do and how we do it. Also with our Grow Your Own programs. You know, I talked about retention. Our retention also becomes our recruitment as well, because as we get teachers who want to become assistant principals, we have auxiliary staff members who want to become teachers. This year, it was awesome. We had 14 teachers who became assistant principals. We had 63 paraprofessionals who became teachers. We had 60 student teachers who became teachers. We had 87 former FISD students who became teachers in our district. I know, that's awesome. And we had over 200 people who subbed in some way in our district who became either teachers or paraprofessionals. So once you're here, most people want to be here and grow here, and we want to help them to do that. And the programs that you see listed there are collaborations between Human Resources, Student Services, Teaching and Learning, our MDs of schools, Special Education Department, Technology. It is everyone trying to find that or provide that avenue for people who want to grow or advance or just develop professionally within the district. So there are avenues for those who want to become principals, assistant principals, teachers, those who just want to advance or just do something different within the district, because our goal is you stay here, you grow here, and you stay here. All right, recruitment strategies. And I'm going to give you the high level, because we can't tell all of our trade secrets. We can keep some things to ourselves. But to increase our fall and spring recruitment efforts, generally recruitment is really heavy in the spring, but knowing that we need to get started early on those things, so doing that, securing quality candidates early, exploring additional sourcing platforms, and always reviewing the benefits and compensation. I told you we do that annually, or at least annually, and then in some cases, if the market appears to be shifting, sometimes we do that during the course of the year. And one of the things that I thought was so awesome, and it's one of those, I know this, I've been here 8 years, and I know this, but it's also just incredible to hear it just reinforced. When we ask new teachers, when we ask those who are new to the district, new professionals, why did you come here? More than 70% talk about a connection to the community, whether that's having heard from a neighbor, someone who lived here, a teacher, a sub, hearing about the reputation. So our greatest recruiters are right here. Right here. We've got 100,000 plus who are great recruiters for us. So our goal is to expand our community outreach, so to ensure that we're getting out into the community, because we've got great sources for all kinds of educators within our community, and then also just to leverage that community engagement, so that those things that people are hearing, they are hearing about all the great things that we do. And then lastly, kind of our little slogan this year for recruiting is, we are one community, we've got one mission, and that is for every student. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Linton. Board, what questions do you have?
I have a few. So
Okay.
If someone else wants to go first, I can wait. But all right, I'll go. When we had our board workshop a couple of weeks ago, you did share the number of teachers who left last year, as well as the number of total employees. Can you share that, please, for for the folks here in attendance tonight and those watching?
Absolutely. Let me make sure. You know what? And you'd like to know number of teachers and number of total staff?
Yes.
Over the course of the full year or the actual hiring season?
The 12-month period.
Okay.
The information that you presented at the board workshop, I think,
Okay.
was for a 12-month period. I don't remember the exact 12-month period.
Okay, no problem. Because I actually shared both with you just because sometimes the question has to do with when we're starting the school year. So
Okay.
for the entire year, we had 1,020 professionals who left, 860 teachers.
Okay. And how does that compare with the previous year?
I do not have the previous year's information in front of me, but I can certainly provide that to you.
Okay, I think the teacher number, if I recall correctly, was approximately 600. Does that sound right?
You know, I hesitate to give numbers
Okay.
if I don't
That
have
was the
it in front of me,
information
but
that
I'm more than happy
I
to share
had.
that with you. I will also say, if you're looking at last year, keep in mind that there are times when it's hiring season versus full year. So the 600 number could be the hiring season, or it may have been the full year, but I can provide that to you.
Okay. So can you go back to the slide around some of the things that we're trying to do in response to the retention issue?
Sure.
It was kind of earlier in the presentation. Right there. Thank you.
Okay.
No, that was it. So in terms of work-life balance and workload and strategic abandonment and things like that, what things have we taken off of teachers' plates this year that maybe they had to do last year that we think is going to help with this particular work-life balance piece? Is there anything thus far that we have been able to take off their plates compared to last school year?
You know, there are some things that we have done, as I mentioned, during the workshop. One of the things we did even during the school year, when we recognized that in January, COVID was running rampant, we had kids who were out, we had teachers who were out, we had teachers who were covering. We had, you know, typically there are a certain number of grades that teachers need to have in order to assess students. What I looked at is we heard teachers saying, my kids aren't here, or I've had to be out, or I've had to help cover. And so right then and there, Dr. Cunningham worked with his staff, and we reevaluated to say, as long as you've got sufficient information to assess what your students are able to do, that was something that was adjusted. I would say the same with that February date. When we went to campuses and heard from people, we're just exhausted. Dr. Walter brought it to you as a board to say, can we use that February day? So the February day that would have been teacher work day or professional development day, that day became a day that was a staff holiday.
Okay, so that was last year though, right?
Mm-hmm. That was last year.
Okay, so I'm talking about this particular school year. What have we done in response to some of this feedback to take some of this workload off the teachers?
Hey,
Yeah, I
Dr.
think-
Linton, this is,
Sorry, I was just going to mention really fast. I apologize. I just wanted to mention that there was a lot of talk about this throughout last year as well, and I know that the calendar team, alongside all of our principals, really tried to design a calendar for this year to provide a bit better work-life balance. There's a 3-day weekend in every single month of the year that I thought was a really great idea to give our teachers knowingly and our staff, they know they have a break once a month, which is not something most school districts do. So I did want to mention that because I know that we received a lot of really positive feedback from staff and from teachers for having that extra time off.
Yes. And I know too, when we look at it, and Dr. Cunningham, feel free to jump in, but even in looking at assessments, would you like to speak to that?
we are working on, and we've done less mandated district assessments this year than we have in the past, and we've got a couple of campuses participating in some pre-implementation phase reviews of some ways to combine yet more assessments. But again, with any new new program, we want to make certain that that's what's best for students and our staff. So we do have a little bit right now, continue to work towards more of those. The other thing I'd add is that Ms. Archambault mentioned our calendar committee. One of the things that we did as a district was usually when we come back to the start of a school year, there's quite a bit of district-led staff development that's provided to teachers. We pulled back on that in the August date, allowed teachers and staff more time to work with each other and get ready for school, and put some of that a little bit more kind of go as you need professional learning. So those are a couple of opportunities that just off the top of my head, not being prepared for that I could give you right now.
Thank you.
And also, Dr. Lind, on top of that, one of the things, Stephanie, I think that I can help with as well, is we've asked our principals to go through these exercises on their own campuses and work with their teachers. And what can they specifically? I remember when Todd was a principal, he did a stop doing list on campus to kind of go into teaming and take some things off teachers' plates. So let me do this as well. I don't have all of that off the top of my head by any means. Would be lying if I was sit here and started going through that information. But I'll start capturing some of that information for the board and let you all know what our principals have done specifically on campuses, to give you all examples of what they've done to do everything they can to eliminate some of the things maybe that teachers were not having to do anymore on their specific campus. And so I'll get that for you as well.
Let me add in, sorry.
No, you go right ahead.
I was going to add in that we have revised that assessment schedule that I mentioned a minute ago, and reminded that we've got some additional small group lesson plans developed for our staff, so they can work with students rather than creating some of the lessons, and that goes to some of the information and resources that the board has allowed us to adopt this year to allow us to provide more to our teachers that we can for students, so that they don't have to spend time creating those things.
Thank you. And I appreciate the question, because it reminds me of that whole communication thing that we talked about, reminding ourselves to make sure that we share with teachers and with staff some of those things that have been changed or pulled back into response. The other thing I want to mention, you asked about that difference between the number of teachers last year and this year, and I mentioned one may have to do with hiring season versus full year. One of the things I provided for you as a board was just providing context to this school year. There were so many additional factors. Instead of, we have that every year things. You've got people who stay home with their children. You've got people who retire. You have those who move. In this year, and over the past 2 years, you've had also these other mitigating factors. You've had the effects of the pandemic, where there were people who decided, you know what, I'm just not going to do it anymore. I am afraid for my health or my safety, or I've learned that I can do more with less, and they chose to stay home. You had that competition from the private sector, who were really recruiting heavily from our teaching staff as well as our administrative staff. We had the ESSER funds, because most districts did receive ESSER funds, so they were able to create positions that they'd not created before. And in many cases, they came recruiting for our teachers and doing some very direct, pretty aggressive recruitment. We had the teacher shortage. I mentioned that perfect storm that occurred. You had people leaving the profession, and you had way fewer people entering the profession. So you had all of those things happening at the same time. You had the number of superintendents who retired. So there were, 10 in this area? When that happens, typically what happens is you've got people who move up in different positions, whether it is within the district or if it's another district. So you had a lot more of those kinds of things happening. So the opportunities for career advancement or something that is career different, that was much greater this year. And then you've heard about the Great Resignation. So that was still going on. And generational priorities. There was a time in particular generations where, I gave the example of my dad, who worked with a company for 42 years, got the watch and everything. Retired 6 months later, went back and worked another 13 years. Well, what we're hearing from our different generations is that's not the goal of my life right now. I'm going to work, I will do a good job, but I'm also going to have that work-life balance. So you had all of those things in addition to the traditional reasons that led to a greater number of teachers who were leaving. But we also saw that in the area. We saw that in the state. It was not, sadly, we aren't immune from those things that happen around us. And it happened for us as well.
Dr. Linton, can I jump in really over here? Can I jump in really quick? I want to, yeah, I'm over here. I wanted to add on to something that Corey said about strategic abandonment to answer your question. If you guys remember when Dr. Cunningham and I presented in August about the whole strategic blueprint for the year and all of our initiatives, and that strategic abandonment is one of the 6 initiatives. And we kind of talked about how it's going to take us some time to essentially turn the ship, right? With 9,000 employees and 75 campuses, there's only so much that we can control from central office, and I think you've heard a lot of the things from Dr. Linton tonight that we are doing our best to control and listen and implement, but we do have some amazing principals that are doing some amazing things. We've talked to them about this idea of strategic abandonment, and really it's, at the campus level, as close to the source as possible, what is it that you can do at that level to help free up some time. And Corey forgot this, but we actually have been collecting that information. He texted me afterward and said he was sorry he forgot it. But we actually have been collecting that information from principals and intend to report that to you guys when we report on the Strategic Abandonment Initiative. And they're doing some great things, and they're saving their teachers a lot of time. And so it's really awesome stuff. So we will get that to you guys in a future presentation.
Well, and one of the things I didn't mention as well, or I mentioned during our board workshop, but when we look at our turnover rate, that was 18.8%. When we looked at the districts around us, 18.7, 19, 22, and 30%. So again, when I say it is not what we want, we would love to have 100% retention. We would love to keep every single person who's doing great things for kids. But sometimes life happens, and life happens around us, and it is happening, and this is in our area. These are in our area. And when we looked at trends, Mr. Clacy, I think you mentioned, you said sometimes these things happen in a cycle, don't they? Absolutely they do. Back in 2000, FISD had a 20% turnover rate with teachers. And then when you looked about 3 to 4 years later, it was down to 14%. When we looked 10 years ago, it was 10.5%. Last taper, it was 11.7%. So these things also happen in a cycle. So whenever you hear numbers, I've mentioned that to you, I always want to make sure that you have the context that goes with the numbers, because the first reaction is, oh my goodness, she said 860. And then I hear we had 600 the year before. What happened? Just know that all of these are factors. Also, I do want to confirm what that number is for you, and I'll send that, of course, to all of you with regards to the full year as well as the hiring season.
So I just want to make a couple more comments, and then I'll turn it back over because I don't want to take too much of the time. But I have had a chance to reflect a little since we had the board workshop, so I just wanted to share some thoughts. And the first thing I want to say is I don't think it's HR's job to solve this in a vacuum. It's all of us sitting up here, every single one of us, as well as your teams and everyone's teams, to solve this. And that's important. As an HR person, I get it. You can't do it by yourself. And I spend an inordinate amount of my professional life dealing with issues like this. So I understand it's a partnership with all of us, and I wanted to call that out. I ran on this issue. During campaign season last year, it was my number one issue that I ran on, and I believe it is one of the most critical issues that we as a district have to face. We cannot educate students without teachers. We just can't do it. And I don't think that it's sustainable for us to lose this number of teachers every year. It's just the amount of impact on our campuses and learning loss for our students. I just don't think we can sustain that. And I understand it's a statewide issue, and I understand it's a nationwide issue, but I think we can solve it here because I think our district is that good, and I think we can lead in Texas and in the nation. I truly believe that. And so I appreciate the context, and I think that we're on the right track with some of this stuff, but I still think there's some more things that we can do. I also want to recognize you, Dr. Linton, because you did take me up on my offer to meet with you and your team and share some thoughts kind of in a smaller setting, and I did appreciate that, and your team was very gracious. And I shared some of the feedback, not only just from my corporate experience, because I think some of that is relevant and some probably isn't because it's different, but I also shared the feedback that I heard from teachers when I was in campaign season before I was part of the board. And I shared that. And the things that I shared were also consistent with some of the TEA findings from the survey that they conducted this past spring. And I know that it's not statistically significant because I probably talked to 50, 60, 70 teachers, something like that. And the TEA, I think, got a 2% response or something like that for their survey. But the themes were the paperwork or the work-life balance, that was one. The other was infringing on the teacher's planning time. And the third was behavior issues in the classroom. Those three things were present in the teachers that I talked to, as well as in the TEA survey. So I would like to see us make sure we include all of those things, because I did hear that loud and clear from teachers who reached out to me and who continue to reach out to me even since my 5 months on the board. So that would be important. The other thing that I shared with your team was that I think we have to look at the campuses that have higher retention to see what's going on there and do some kind of action planning around that. We have some campuses that have lost, elementary campuses that have lost half or close to half of their teaching staff. And again, there's probably something going on that I think we need to look at and do that. So that was another recommendation that I made. And then finally, having a turnover goal as part of the goals for the superintendent as well as the IST members, just to make sure that it's an all hands on deck. We all work together to help solve this problem. And it's not going to be solved overnight. Everyone understands that. But how do we get to less than 860 this year, or stop them going to Prosper ISD or wherever else they're most likely going when they leave Frisco? Because they're not all leaving teaching altogether. Some are leaving to go to other districts for different reasons. How can we get those issues on the right track? And then also, up until now, my comments about turnover before being on the board and since being on the board has focused on teachers, but I am equally concerned about the number of staff members who are also leaving. So I think to the degree that we can expand these efforts, like you mentioned, to the staff as well, in addition to the teachers, I think would be impactful. Thank you.
Great, and thank you for your time when we met. I do want to address a few of the things, because one of the things that we talked about during our time together is the things that you mentioned are definitely things that we're hearing as well and are addressing. So it wasn't something that was unique, because I think you talked about reading academies, and that is something that we had been working on, and even as a district to have had the approval of the board to give our teachers some compensation for it, because it was not a funded mandate at all. And so the time that was spent was an inordinate amount of time. So as a district, to try to support teachers in that way and to provide some time to work on that, that was something that we did. But we do know that absolutely was an issue. With discipline, there will be a presentation on that coming up. And then with planning periods, we talk with principals, we talk with staff about the use of planning periods. If staff has an issue with their use of planning periods, they do not have to engage in meetings during those times, but the expectations don't change. And what we hear from principals and what we hear from teachers is, I would rather use that time so that I can, after work, do some other things. So just know that that's some of the feedback we get, as well as we're talking with teachers. And, I know you had that opportunity to talk with, the 80-something. We had a chance to meet with that group of 200. We did get about close to 2,000 responses from teachers from the teacher survey. So we've had a chance to hear some of those things as well. And you mentioned not sustaining that loss. As I mentioned to you guys, I think 20 years ago, when we had the 20% turnover rate, that next year I looked at it, it decreased by 0.1% to 19.9. But 2 years later, it was down at 14%. And then 4 years after that, 5 years after that, it was at about 11 or 12%. So I don't anticipate that we will have to sustain this kind of loss. So I want to make sure that we're not putting something out there that may inadvertently cause a fear that, oh my gosh, everybody's leaving. Because I just want to make sure we know, when we look at the context of everything that's going on, that that's not the case. But we do know we have some areas on which we need to work. And with regards to people leaving to go to other districts, when we looked at professionals, there were about 25 to 29% who left to go to another district. And when someone selects that they left to the district to go to another district, we ask additional questions. We ask them to tell us, why did you leave? 73% of them took a job closer to home or advanced their careers. 73% of them. Of that group, we had about 25%, when you look at all of the professionals who left, who said they were moving. And a large number of those were moving more than 30 miles. And when you think about being on your child's calendar, when you think about the cost of gas, that 30 miles was significant. When we looked at those who left due to job satisfaction, it was 6% of all of our professional resignations indicated that they left to go to another district because of job satisfaction. If we even just look at those that just went for a job in another district, it was less than a quarter of them. So again, I always want to make sure that you have context to the numbers that you hear, because it becomes, oh my gosh, this is happening. When we look at our neighboring districts, the number one place that people chose to go was to a district that wasn't one of our surrounding districts. We have 12 to 14 districts against whom we benchmark. And when teachers or staff members resign, they select that they're going to another district, they tell us which district. So it wasn't one of our neighbors that was the number one district. It was a district outside of our geographical location. So I just, again, always want to make sure that you have context with your numbers. Always, always, always. And I thank you so much for talking about partnering, because that's what it's going to take. It's what made it happen this year, and it was a tough year. Kudos to every single person in this district, every teacher, every para, every principal, every bus driver, every cashier, every single person, because it took all of them, and everybody took on something that they hadn't taken on before. It was a different kind of year. And I can't say that it's going to be much different next year, but I can say if we continue, we will come out of this just like the district did in 2000. We will come out of it. We absolutely will. And if it can happen anywhere, it's here.
Pam, I think too, and Kimberly, as we kind of, get deep into budgeting season over the next, couple of months, as we barrel ahead for next year's budget, if there are unique or interesting ways that the board can support with monetary resources your recruitment efforts, because I know that as those numbers continue to dwindle in undergraduates that are choosing this as a career path, that it does matter that we get to them first. And so if there are ways that we can incentivize, I'm committing to Frisco ISD prior to committing to others, I don't have a solution. I just know that as we're budgeting, I know that we look at unique opportunities like that to be able to increase retention and recruitment. So it's just something to consider, because as those numbers continue to dwindle with undergrads, it's going to become even more, we're going to need even a larger compelling story as to why Frisco. And I think we have a lot of really great reasons why Frisco. I think we can all answer that question in a pretty compelling way. But I know when a teacher's just getting out of school that they do have student loan debt. They do have things that they might need to move here. And so there are things about starting a new job in a new profession that if we could incentivize that move for them to choose Frisco, it just might be something for us to look at. And I know money doesn't solve everything. I don't want to say that. But I do know that it helps, especially with new teachers that are trying to figure out which district that they would like to start their career.
Thank you.
Pam.
Yeah.
As somebody who watches markets every day and studied economics and looks at it through that lens, I agree with Stephanie on a lot of things. I mean, I know that teachers have a lot on their plate, so there's no denying that at all. And the activities of the last 3 years with COVID and the way that disrupted all of society, our staff as well as our students and everybody in the community, there's a lot of dust settling, to put it nicely, that is going on in the wake of all of that. Students whose personalities might have changed, staff members who are questioning, whether or not they're in the right profession, whether they can juggle all the things that they've got. I did say in the workshop that we've always seen a direct correlation between the economy and how good it is and how difficult it is to work in government, let alone education. And there's a direct correlation there or an inverse correlation there. So when the economy weakens, you typically find it easier to recruit. And the opposite is true today when we have historically low unemployment rate. That won't always be the same, and that's not always in our control completely. But to that extent, it's not an excuse. We know that teachers want help. We have a track record of trying to understand exactly what that help is that they need and trying to identify it with and serve it with the resources that we have. We've lowered class sizes when we've had economic resources. The waivers that we'll approve tonight are some of the lowest that I've seen in the last few years since we passed the TRE. Support staff, to the extent we can afford to hire them and take things off teachers' plates. I know that we've done that historically. We'll continue to do it. And then pay, obviously. Very competitive this year when some districts were using temporary ESSER funds to temporarily juice the rates that they were willing to pay their staff members, and we can only do so much in that environment. And so to the presentation that was given earlier tonight about the legislative priorities, and asking the legislature to try to keep the basic allotment up with the rate of inflation so that we can continue to do that kind of thing. All those things I think will contribute to making this continuing to be an attractive place for people to choose to work. But to your point, context is everything. It's very important, and we don't operate in a vacuum. So we are in a competitive environment. We have other school districts around us, and we have private employers who find a lot of talent in the staff members that we've got, and are able to pay them a lot more right now than we are. And that's just a fact of the matter. So, the tide will turn on that, and we need to be ready for it when it does. We need to be acting on it today, because the last 3 years have been hard on a lot of people. And, we're just now kind of trying to put all those pieces back together to get everybody settled again. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Board, any other comments or questions for Dr. Linton? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. I had to end on that slide right there.
Perfect.
Just
I
had to
do
get
like
there.
it.
Just had to get there. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Pam, I feel like you and your team deserve more than a resolution tonight. I'm not sure. I feel like we maybe missed the mark, but we should have been doing something more. But we appreciate you all very much. Do we have any other members of HR that are here with us tonight? If so, can you stand? Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you. Stand. There you go. Okay, board.